Thank you so much, Bill. I don't think I want to be here when you let it go long. Thank you so much for inviting me here this evening. When Bill hand-delivered the invitation for me to speak here this evening, I knew this was not a typical invitation or a typical group. This conviction became even stronger when I met with Tarek and Isa, who helped me understand more about the center and the good work that it does. I'm honored to be asked to speak here this evening, especially at the beginning of a year with its focus on empathy, walking in another's shoes. And when Tarek made that remark about empathy, I was feeling the empathy from all of you about the challenge to me of addressing this topic this evening. But I'd like to start by saying just a few things about the connections between Southern Polytechnic State University and the goals of the Istanbul Center. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have a number of faculty, administrators, students, and supporters of Southern Polytechnic here this evening, as well as Dan Papp from Kennesaw State University and other colleagues from the university system. And I appreciate the support that all of you demonstrate by being here this evening. As many of you know already, Southern Polytechnic is part of the university system of Georgia, but we have a special statewide mission to focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We have a very strong program in construction management, and although this fact seems to have been lost in some of the public discussions in the state over the last couple of months, Southern Polytechnic currently has 7 engineering programs, including ones in civil, electrical, and mechanical engineering. 2 things in particular distinguish our programs and our university community. One is that the academic programs are practical and applied in nature. We focus on educating students to use knowledge to solve real-world problems. They write software, design roads and bridges, build structures and computers, and create communities. Our graduates work to make Georgia and the world a better place. The other distinguishing characteristic about the university is the diversity of our university community, especially among our students. For example, Southern Polytechnic ranks number 1 in the country for the number of African American students earning bachelor's degrees in engineering-related fields. And this fall, our students come from 102 different countries, and 8 of our current students call Turkey home. Right now, about 16% of our overall student population are international students, and more than half of these return to their home countries to put their education to work, making their home countries a better place, too. At Southern Polytechnic, we believe strongly in the importance of international education, and we believe that by providing a diverse community on campus, we are better preparing our graduates to work in the global community of science, engineering, technology, and business. And I'm struck by the parallels between the stated values of our university community and those articulated by the Istanbul Center. The values that are part of the center's mission statement include respect, acceptance, dialogue, and richness of faith and culture. At Southern Polytechnic, we have explicitly written out our core values that define the institution, and these include respect, integrity, lifelong learning, responsibility, diversity, collaboration, and cooperation. I see a lot of overlap in those sets of values. Our 2 organizations have strong parallels, and these common values and goals are linked, I believe, through the concept of empathy. Empathy is the capacity to share the happiness or sadness, the emotions and feelings of another person. This ability leads to understanding, to compassion, and to a wide range of other connections between people. And I think that there are 2 ways that we are able to experience empathy. One is because we have been in the situation that the other person has. We know from personal experience how it feels. And the other is because we can imagine how they feel. Our ability to imagine may come from a similar experience of our own, from the story of a friend or family member who has had that experience, or even from the observations of what happens to a stranger. And although empathy can be a way of sharing someone else's joy or happiness, the empathy that connects with difficulties is the one that's most likely to move us to action. understanding the troubles of others can bring a focused response, a focused kind of help, by trying to right a wrong, by trying to fix a problem, or simply by sharing and understanding. These actions can be as simple as a smile or as complex as an international relief effort in Haiti. A friend of mine named Emily served in the Peace Corps in a village in Turkey in 1964. And when Emily first went there, she stayed in the home of the village's school principal. And Emily, who was a young woman from the northern Midwest, was alone, far away from home. But she immediately felt welcome and accepted. And initially, she wasn't sure why this was true, although she was profoundly grateful for it. But as she came to know her hostess better, Emily learned that this school principal's father had been murdered when she was very young and that she had been sent away to boarding school. She knew from her own experience what it was like to live among strangers in a new place. And that gave her the empathy for how Emily must feel being in a new place, alone in her village. And Emily believes to this day that that is why her Turkish host was able to deal with her own anxiety so well. It was the empathy of experience. Later in her career as a college professor in anthropology, Emily returned to Turkey with her husband Glenn, who was a professor of comparative religions, especially Hindu and Southeastern Asian religions. And while they were in Turkey during Ramadan, Glenn went to the mosque every evening. And he still talks about the ways in which the people there went to great lengths to make him feel welcome, in spite, he says, of what he describes as his really lousy Turkish. He was struck by how egalitarian the village was and by how accepted he felt. And when I asked him why he thought this was true, he gave me an answer that reflects the empathy of imagination and, in a sense, of history. Throughout its history, Turkey has been at a crossroads in so many ways, and the country has absorbed and benefited from many, many cultures. Because of this critical location, linking Asia and Europe, the Turkish culture is one that welcomes people of many different cultures and many different backgrounds. And Glenn believes it's this cultural history that what led to his fellow worshipers being so welcoming to him. From different perspectives, Glenn and Emily both see and appreciate how that empathy of their friends and hosts in Turkey impacted their lives. Now, Glenn and Emily also have a Turkish friend who moved from Turkey to Switzerland, where he found himself working as a translator for the local school system, interpreting for the Turkish students to communicate with their German-speaking Swiss teachers. And this friend really wanted the teachers to understand their Turkish students better. So he took a group of about 30 teachers on a trip to Turkey, and he brought them to the village where Emily was living. The teachers, as all of you who have been to Turkey already know, had a wonderful time. And the family that Emily was living with wanted to do something special for them. And so they decided to cook a meal for the visiting teachers. Now, this was not a family that would typically have enough food in the pantry to prepare some elaborate meal on the spur of the moment, especially for such a large group. But they had potatoes and boiled eggs and greens. The family prepared this meal, and the entire group sat down and shared it together. It's a pretty amazing act of friendship and fellowship and understanding and empathy. And when I was talking to Bill Bowling yesterday, he shared several similar stories of Turkish hospitality. And as he would point out, sharing food is an act of community. And his great work with the Atlanta Community Food Bank is based, in part, on an extraordinary business model, but it also depends on the empathy of people who have been hungry themselves, who know people who have been, or who can simply imagine being hungry, all of whom are then moved to volunteer and contribute to the food bank's work as a result. So in part, it's empathy that drives that organization. And I'm impressed now to realize that after more than 45 years, my friend Emily still remembers that simple, spontaneous meal. She remembers who was there, what they ate, how it was prepared, and how she felt at the time. And for those of us who don't always remember what we had for breakfast, I think the memory of that particular meal stands as a particularly powerful statement of the welcome and empathy that was expressed toward those visiting teachers. My parents traveled in Turkey in 1997, and they had an experience that also reflects the intersection of two cultures and two languages. They were visiting a market with some other friends, also Americans, and the friends were having a very difficult time trying to communicate with the shopkeeper. They were trying to purchase a small souvenir rug, and they were just having no luck communicating. And a young man stepped up and offered to help. The Americans gratefully accepted his assistance, and he helped them make the purchase. Okay, I'm going to pause the story right there. At this point in the story, this young man has clearly shown real empathy for the two American women visiting his country. Because he had such good command of English, we can speculate that he may have traveled abroad, and he too may have had the challenge of being in a different country and trying to cope with different languages. And he too may have had the experience of having felt lost or frustrated or confused. But whether his empathy came from experience or imagination, his concern for these two visitors was evident. But there's more to this story. At the end of the transaction, after he had helped these two women purchase the souvenir rugs, he said, perhaps a little wistfully, "You know, I sell those in my shop too." And it turns out that this young man owned a shop just across the way, but in the interest of helping these American women who were having difficulty, out of the empathy he felt for them, he ended up helping his competition and foregoing a sale. And then two things happened. One was that one of the two women he had just helped worked for Bloomingdale's department store in New York. And she immediately understood what had happened and put all of her retail marketing skills to work to help him reorganize and rearrange his display that would improve the sales of what he had on the market. The other thing that happened was that my mother admired this rug and wondered where they had gotten it. And of course, these two women referred my mother to the shop of the man who had helped them with their purchase. My mother bought 7 souvenir rugs. And when other people came up to ask her where she'd gotten them, she too sent them to the shop of the young man who had helped her friends. My father made the observation in a journal he wrote at the time that this may be one of the few examples in history of a good deed not being punished. My examples here focus on small personal interactions that illustrate empathy across language and culture and geography. These can be expanded and are expanded every day in a million ways throughout the world. And as the Istanbul Center launches this year's theme for dialogues and discussions, these conversations will expand to much broader topics. Individual empathy is a necessary starting point for people, groups, countries, and continents to reach across boundaries and truly understand, walk in the shoes of others. The goal at the Istanbul Center is nothing less than world peace. Empathy at all levels is one of our most important tools to help achieve that dream. Now, when Bill originally asked me to speak this evening at the beginning of a series of dialogues on empathy, I initially wondered, why me? And I think I have part of the answer, even if no one connected to the Istanbul Center knew this at the time. Consider again the full title of the theme for this year, Empathy, Walking in Another's Shoes. There's a song titled Walk a Mile in My Shoes. Some of you may remember it. In the early 1970s, it became something of an anthem for racial tolerance, for compassion, and yes, empathy. Artists who recorded the song included Harry Belafonte and Lena Horne, although by far the most famous version was covered by Elvis Presley. That song was written in 1969 by Joe South, who had been a student in mechanical engineering technology at Southern Polytechnic State University. Now, some of you may know some of the other songs that Joe South wrote, including the one that received the most Grammy Awards, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. But in the theme of walking a mile in someone else's shoes has a direct link to my university. And I'd like to quote just a couple of lines from that song, written by a former student at Southern Polytechnic. And my husband and my colleagues from Southern Polytechnic are sighing that's a sigh of relief that I'm not going to try to sing it. But just a couple of lines. If I could be you, if you could be me for just 1 hour, if we could find a way to get inside each other's mind, if you could see you through my eyes instead of your ego, I believe you'd be surprised to see that you've been blind. Walk a mile in my shoes. Before you abuse, criticize, and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes. In a sense, the harmony in Joe South's song fits with the concept of harmony among people, among cultures, among religions, and among countries, which is part of what we're working for at Southern Polytechnic and very much part of what the Istanbul Center emphasizes as well. We are both trying to accomplish this through education, through acceptance, through rich dialogue, through respect, and through empathy. I very much appreciate the opportunity to reflect on the characteristics that bring two fundamentally different organizations together for a common purpose. Indeed, to walk in each other's shoes. Thank you.